Can everyone hear me?
Loud and clear, Ms. Carolyn.
Great, that's wonderful. So, I see we have a few students. I think most of the students, I understand. And welcome to a UN75 dialogue on making the world a better place by 2045. I am Carolyn Trent Sandiford, of course, and the whole purpose of this dialogue is to have a conversation on where we are at as a society, as a country, as a global community. We are currently confronted by many, many challenges. COVID-19 has been one of the key ones currently with us. That is, to some extent, reconfiguring the way we do things, how we are educated, how we do business, how we do healthcare. It has upended our society and globe and the world in so many ways. But we also have some major other issues that are upon us: climate change, rising inequality, violence and crime. And of course, there's always the mega shift in terms of our demography, where more people are beginning to live in urban communities. And it is expected that by 2050, more than 70 to 75% of the global population will be living in urban areas. So the UN is engaging in a dialogue on its 75th anniversary. And basically the dialogue is about where we are, the future that we want to create, looking at it, and are we on track with creating that future, and what are some of the gaps that we need to fill. We'll be looking at the conversation in three key areas. One, what are some immediate priority issues that we are confronted with, immediate challenges and issues. Issues that you believe are very important, very critical, and which you would advise the United Nations and its partnership with the government of Belize, of course, as to these are the priority issues and also the priority actions. So we are talking about issues and we're also talking about action. So it's within the immediate space, and then we will look at what are some of the future priority issues that you are seeing coming at us by 2045, because in 2045, the UN will also be celebrating 100 years. And so the idea then is, what would be some of those priority issues that we want to talk about, and what would be some solutions in 2045? And then finally, we want to look to some extent on the UN and to see what it is that they're doing well, what it is they're not doing well, and then how it is that we can guide them as to what they need to do to improve and deliver on these issues. Now, because we have a small group, I thought perhaps what we can do is to do more conversation, and we will be recording, and so we'll be able to take the notes from the recording. We have everybody, so far we have about, seven persons. I'm going to ask you to keep your mics on mute. And then if once we open the conversation, just unmute, and I will be calling you as you unmute to have that, to make your contribution. So we start then by thinking of immediate issues. What is it that you see as some of the immediate, the most pressing issues confronting Belize today? And at the same time, you can start to talk about what would be some of your recommendations for immediate actions. Anybody want to start? And let me just quickly, a very quick note on two things. One, we are recording. So everything that you say, we will record and put in our summary report. And two, there is a report that will be submitted to the United Nations on this specific dialogue coming from the persons who are participating in it. Okay, so just letting you know that from the start. So go ahead, who, Beresford, you want to start the conversation?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Carlin. For me, the biggest immediate issue to tackle, given the plethora of problems that we deal with, is the issue of governance. Because for me, at least, governance is, and political leadership is how we go about addressing our economic, social, and environmental problems, especially in developing countries. Figuring out, and one thing with systems, it's not a one size fits all that works for countries at different development levels, but figuring out what level of autonomy or level of control that the government needs to have to get us to a place where we can really start focusing on institutional building. What type of governance system would work for Belize, and how we go about juggling and prioritizing all of these challenges. So we really have a planning issue, which is, I think, the biggest problem that we have in our country. How do we plan for now whilst also planning for continuity? I give simply the example of our National Development Plan, Horizon 2030. That has not been a part, and I've been in the government service for about 6 years now, 7 if you count my year as an intern, and it hasn't been something that has been part of mainstream dialogue in my day-to-day operations in the Ministry of Trade. So it's something that I would like to see help coming from whether the UN, whether it's from other foreign partners, to help us to sort of strengthen this governance process, to make it more open and more inclusive.
Good. So for you, governance is going to be very key, not only in terms of now, but also in terms of the future, and in terms of whatever we do today has to be done simultaneously with what we are doing for tomorrow. Basically, that is what I was capturing from you.
Yeah, certainly agree.
Great. So governance. So anyone else wants to take on that question as well? What do you consider a priority issue for the United Nations, and what would be your recommendation based on that for priority action? So let me see, anyone have their mic off? Anyone wants to make a contribution? Fitzgerald?
Yes, ma'am. This is Lucian, by the way.
Okay, Lucian. Okay.
In addition to Beresford's point that he raised, in Belize, we also, in addition to our governance issue, we also find that between transitions of government, there isn't one in Belize, and that is very necessary to building our governance system as well. We find that between administrations, like for example, what's happening now, what has happened in the past, governments quickly take office, they do what they need to do, they take out what they need to take out, and there isn't a transitional phase where they go and they assess everything from an objective standpoint, and there is what you say, you kind of trim off the fat. Sometimes they take the bath water, they throw the bath water with the baby as well, and that contributes to our governance issues as well. So, and that's a very key, to me, that's a very key step to strengthening our governance, because not everything that one party did was bad or anything like that. So we have to have that type of transitional platform as well.
Okay, but would you, going back to what Beresford was saying, would you attribute this to the fact that we have a plan in place, but the fact there's supposedly to be a national development plan, but the reality is that we have not yet linked our governance system to that development plan, so that when one party moves in and one moves out, the link that is supposed to allow for the transition really is not there? would you consider that as perhaps a contributing factor? I don't know. I'm just trying to link what Beresford said back to you.
And that is precisely the point. Both political parties do not see the importance, or any of the political parties, let me say that, because not even from the so-called third parties, we hear the talk about the development plan, or the actions in the development plan has been highlighted. And so yes, there is a lack of there is a lack of linkage to the governance system and this development plan. They feel like, okay, it's the NGOs that are supposed to do it, when in fact you have a very vital role to play in this coming to a success.
Okay, good. So anyone else want to add? Maria?
Yes, good day, everybody. I guess my point sort of segues with that which Lucian and Beresford have both raised, and it is more of how I think that's one of our biggest issues, is that we lack enforcement mechanisms. And I think that's a problem, because you can have all these goals, you can sign on to all these treaties, but at the end of the day, if there's no proper mechanism to enforce it, and I think this goes beyond just governance. So I know you had requested as well suggestions. I can't think of anything right now, but I know it's a major problem, and I think that's generally a problem not with the United Nations, the lack of enforcement. So although we talk about Horizon, we talk about all these other things, at the end of the day, there's no real way to enforce it, and I think that's a problem.
And you said yes. Well, I've asked for solutions, but yes, solutions are also important, because one of the things I remember speaking a little earlier before this, when I was in communications with Beres, one of the things that came up was the role of civil society. And so you spoke earlier about enforcement mechanisms, but so I'm going to put this out then as to what would you say is the role of civil society in governance? Because you're all speaking to governance issues, you're all speaking to the sort of the fact that national development planning is not integrated or mainstream into a governance system. And in any governance system, your governance system is or ought to be designed to bring about the vision that you have. So if we're at this place where we're moving from one government to the next, we have a national development plan, but we're also having issues with enforcing that plan. Where then does civil society, what role does civil society play in all this? Anyone want to take that on?
That's a big one, Miss Carol.
I am just throwing it because I thought, I recall Beresford saying that was the role of civil society is also very key and important to this group. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about where, and also within, let me say, also within the context of this dialogue, in that we are looking at what are these immediate actions that we can take to address some of the issues. Now we are recognize that there are long-term issues. Many of these are long-term, require long-term strategies. But very key for now is, what would you say we need to deal with now? Go ahead. You wanted to add something, Lucian?
I was just going to say I heard someone coming in, so I'm going to go after that person.
Okay, so who else do we have?
Hi, Ms. Carol. Oh, Brighton, could go ahead.
All right, go right ahead, Brighton.
Yes, I was just wanting to contribute to what was said earlier in regards to the role of civil society in governance. That's an issue for Belizeans, or for Belize on a whole, simply because we tend to have this culture of seeing the system of democracy only being functional at or before the time of an election period. And that has to change. However, it requires some form of institutional or structural mechanism to be able to garner the voices and concerns of civil society. I don't think that there is a unified approach in bringing the voices of Belizeans across to the leaders in government, and that is a huge problem. I look at it from an academic perspective where we're in a democracy. However, we tend to go down this vicious spiral of democracy, and we swing towards almost something that seems authoritative. And it's almost as if though the voices of the people who are the people who put those in power gets somewhat silenced. And then there is a pendulum shift, and it almost seems existential. And so how do we maintain a democratic society really that is inclusive, is effective and efficient, is important going forward? And I think that starts by one, educating the population and finding varying mechanisms to do so, but also creating something that's institutional to have these concerns be vetted.
Okay, interesting. You speak of institutional mechanisms and educating the populace. Where should this institutional mechanism be? And who should be educating the populace? Who else wants to chip in on that?
Honestly,
you saying you're back? Okay,
yes,
go ahead.
I am back. Honestly, this is going to take fixing the public sector, and this is a very interesting how to say, a perspective that I have for a while now. Just now, Maria spoke about enforcement of our laws, and we have always been praised in Belize, in the Caribbean, whether people are aware or not, that we have consistently written strong laws on our books, that some of our laws has been used as examples in other Caribbean countries. However, why I say the public sector needs to be fixed is because the proper human resources, because it's not that these laws doesn't have an enforcement mechanism built in, it is that because the proper human resource is not allocated for the enforcement to be a reality here in Belize. And so that's where the public sector needs to be fixed first. And through the public sector, we're going to have a mechanism whereby the civil society can interact more seamlessly with the government. And through that, then we will have the change that we want to see, because now the changes that we're requesting, it's not through our ministers, it's not through our politicians, but it's through the public sector, which is vital for government, because a lot of people view the government or the governance structure only through that of the politicians, and that's not the reality. The reality is that governance, and for it to work, comes through the public sector. And we all can agree here that the public sector and its systems that it has in place leaves much to be desired. And so we have to fix the public sector, how we allocate human resources to these enforcement mechanisms, and then we have civil society interacting with these departments, and then that is where transitions and that change is going to come more seamless, because once the people understand, oh, you go to this department for this to happen or for that to happen, and then this is the way, you know, these linkages can happen so that it reaches the house or whatever, then I believe that coupled with education, then people will begin to understand, hey, okay, I know that now my voice will be heard even outside of an election cycle.
Okay. Interesting. It's what I'm seeing you doing is really elevating the role of civil society in governance,
right?
Which is interesting, because there has also been arguments, and I put this out to you all. There's also been arguments to say by elevating the role of civil society in governance, what we are then also doing is to give the government a pass, in the sense that it is the government that it's the people go to the polls to elect the legislature, who appoints the executive to execute and to enforce those laws. So if we then say the civil society, who has stepped up in so many ways where gaps, where the government is not functioning, where service is not being delivered. In fact, one of the principles of the UN and part of the whole design of the UN75 dialogues have been to also hear the voices of what we would say groupings that have traditionally been excluded from the table. And they have been excluded from the table because they are not seen as part and parcel of people to be consulted in a participatory way in a governance system. So when we say, well, civil society ought to do this, are we then not saying, oh, you do this because government is not doing that? Civil society derives its the government derives its funds from the taxpayers, but civil society derives its funds from sources which it has to write for grants and so on and so forth. So I throw that in the mix to say, if we talk about the role of civil society, and in this COVID-19 period, what we have seen a lot that civil society has stepped up a lot in terms of delivering on services to particular groupings of people, whether they're persons with disability or the LGBTQ community, or people who are in the mentally challenged or the elderly. They have stepped up to the game. So is it then that we may be asking more from them? I'm just throwing that out as something for consideration. I see Dominique is with us and she has her mic down. So Dominique, talk to me.
Hi,
The
good evening.
the musa.
Good evening, good evening. My formal congratulations on your appointment as President of the Senate. I wanted to just chip in very quickly. When I first came in, and I apologize for being late, you were asking a bit about checks and balances in governance and what civil society, the role that civil society plays. And I think civil society plays a role in being that middle ground of that check and balance, because one of the last things you said is that, is civil society taking up the role or filling in a gap, and I think indeed that is what civil society is to be doing. Civil society in many ways has to justify its existence, right? Through writing grants, writing reports after those grants are exhausted. Government doesn't exactly have to do that formally. Their only check and balance, because of just the way our governance system is set up, is each other. And so that is part and parcel of the problem. Their check and balance is just each other. The civil society check and balance is themselves, along with the people they report to, the people they serve, the governance system in which they operate, because civil society organizations must report their financials to government, must be able to justify why they exist, and constantly do that on a yearly basis. So civil society is really and truly the gap filler, but also in some ways can further elevate itself to be the best practice of how governance should work, because there are so many check and balances within civil society operations. So that's kind of the contribution I wanted to make.
Okay, give me 1 second. 1 second, let me put her on the slide. I was sitting in the dark. Yes. So that's an interesting word, the gap filler. I never quite heard that one before. in terms of the CSOs and the work that they do. So if then I was to capture from what this group is saying, that regardless of all that is happening right now, that for you all, your key priority issue has to be addressing our governance, the pitfalls of our governance system. And you're also seeing civil society's role as needed to be elevated in this process. Is that what I'm getting out of this?
Certainly.
Okay.
Certainly. Because as well, how to say, piggybacking on what Dominique had said, the civil society captures those nuggets in our society that is often overlooked, that you had highlighted earlier.
Yeah.
And so that really, the quintessence of that is that at the end of the day, them being elevated in the governance system is also paramount for us and to our development in Belize.
Okay, sounds good. Now, let's start. So we've been talking of some of what is, and I know there's so many more things that we can add to what's maybe the immediate issues and priorities. And governance is key, yes, because as we continue to point out, governance underpins our socio-political, cultural, economic development, and how we manage our resources in terms of delivering on the services that the state should be delivering, whether it's about our safety, whether it's about infrastructure, whether it's about education, healthcare, recreation, and so on and so forth. Now, as you all talked a bit about governance and civil society and the role of planning and transitioning from one government to the next, and the fact that it appears that the way the public sector is operating, that there is no clear sense of purpose. That yes, you have a plan, but then it's like the public sector is operating in a sort of day-to-day way. So you're just dealing with what you have to deal with every day, but this is not necessarily geared toward any clear objectives that are being tracked and monitored in terms of delivering on that national development plan. Now, if we're all talking like this today, I want to have you to put yourself in the place of 2045. 25 years from now, I don't know how old you all will be, right? I won't talk about my age, but I don't know how old you all will be, right? But let's talk a little, let's be visionary, because we often see the whole issue of the national development planning was to start thinking about what the future, and this is the same conversation that the UN75 is having, is saying what kind of future do we want to create? Where are we now, and what are the gaps that needs to be filled? So if we think of the future, let us put it at 2045, 25 years from now. Currently, Belize is 39 years. This is our 39 years of independence. 25 years from now, we are going to be seeing about 64 years of independence. Now, do you believe that Belize will be better off by 2045? Do you think it will be worse off by 2045? Or do you think it will be same old, same old? In other words, do you all have any hope for the future? So the question then comes back to 2045. Let us look down the road, because remember, we keep saying that the future we want to create has to start with what we do now and how we feel now. So if you all are thinking 2025, 2045, think about it and think about Belize and think about all that's happening, from climate change to changes in technology, because technology has been something that has been exploding and changing the world and how we do things. And COVID-19 to some extent accelerated that. We spoke about demographic shifts. People are living more in urban communities. We're talking about issues of inequality and violence and crime. And many of these things are on the rise. So having said all that you have said, I would want you all to respond to 2045. And I would want for you all to say whether you believe that you would be better off, or whether you will be worse off, or whether you will be this. If you think Belize will be the same, but the global community will be the same. Keisha has put in the chat, and just a reminder, you can also put your response in the chat. So I would like for you to open the mics. I will see whose mics are open, and you can also put your response in the chat. So will Belize and the global community be better off? Will it be worse off? Or will it be the same? What say you? And why? Do you have hope for the future? Talk to me.
Good day again. I think it's really in determining whether we'll be better off or worse off. It's really a balancing exercise. And I think we must be alive to the nuances and the unique position that Belize is in. And this stems from, as you would have mentioned, climate change or other things. And I think what it will come down to, there has to be a proviso. It can't be that we will be better off because this will be better. And I think the proviso is that if there is willpower, and I think that's what it will come down to. Because like anything can be in place, but if at the end of the day that is not what people want, or that is not what we're working towards, none of it is going to happen. So even if there are shifts in, I guess, even the other countries, and even we look at Belize and we look at the other Caribbean territories. So you can make the comparison, for example, Barbados. Although, you know, for looking at tourism, they've undoubtedly been affected by COVID-19 and the detrimental effects that tourism has had on tourism economies, heavily based tourism economies. And then you have Caribbean countries that like Belize, who aren't as dependent on tourism as other Caribbean islands like St. Kitts and Nevis or Barbados. However, they're still in a better economic position than we are. So I think there are just so many real issues that we'd like to look at. And I mean, I'll be 45 in 2045, but I don't think that I can say that we'll be in a better position. I think to say that would be me imagining a utopic society, which I think is great, but I honestly don't think so.
Okay, interesting perspective. Anybody, Beresford, you want to add to that?
Yeah, very, very interesting perspective from the young Maria. Maria is she's the baby of the bunch in our group. But certainly very thoughtful and formidable in her own right. What I'd like to add to what Maria said, and I'll try to sort of piggyback on some of her comments, is there are certain things that need to happen for us to really realize that better future. One of them, well, two things that really cross my mind is how do we get the common man on the ground more engaged with the governance process? I think one particular example is, and something that I've used my social media platforms to challenge and just remind people to think about is a virtual or online version of the Gazette. Just having that source of information accessible to people and making it more accessible, it really would add to the process of getting young people, for example, more involved and interested in what is happening in the government. Of course, that will have to come with the support programs and the same leadership from your civil society organizations like the Youth Voices and these other groups to make the conversation relevant. But things like that are foundational starts as to what we need to get people more involved. Because one thing I've found in government and also being a member, a former executive member in the Public Service Union, is when we engage with people and we hear stories about what is happening in these government ministries that cause progress to be delayed, you often find that there's a challenge that their engagements are transactional. And so you mentioned about us, going through the process on a day-to-day basis. For me personally, I would hope to see if I start seeing signs that our government is becoming more aspirational, more big picture thinking and big picture acting in terms of how they carry themselves, in terms of how they open themselves up and be transparent in terms of how they operate. So open governance is a big thing. And what I wanted to, from the previous point, not to go back too far, when we speak about governance and planning, we often, when we speak about enforcement, we often forget the monitoring and evaluation of our policies and our operation throughout the process before you get to the actual enforcement process where you have to bring penalties and that type of thing. Just to parallel with one of our Caribbean states, our sister states, in Jamaica, there's a Ministry of Planning that has oversight to monitor and evaluate the implementation of government plans and policies. So in Belize, comparing that to Belize now, we have a planning unit in the Ministry of Economic Development, which is staffed by about 4 persons, I believe. So all the policy mismatch and disjointedness, if you have a bigger oversight, not only from civil society, but from within the government itself, that ensures that everything is coordinated and harmonious, you likely would get better returns as you go forward with your policies. So upgrading the monitoring function to ensure that everything is, because government is a system. It's one of the biggest and most complex machines that's in the world. So you have to figure out how to get all of the moving parts to work together. If that we see signs that government becomes more open and transparent and focused whilst becoming more aspirational, I can definitely see 2025 and 2045 being much better off than where we are today.
Okay, so let me also read in the chat. Certain better as the governance process will become more accessible. Christina, the mere fact that we are in conversation about the issue and where we see Belize gives me hope, giving voices to the marginalized and those who are often not heard is a step in the right direction. Good. So we're talking then about 2045 and how you all feel in terms of where Belize and the global community is going. Anybody else want to add to that? How they feel about 2045?
Yes, please.
Okay.
All right, so who am I? Let me just check. Kyle, is that Kyle?
Yes.
All right, go right ahead. I see Kyle is off, and if there is anyone who wants to
Trina
speak
had,
after Kyle.
Trina had unmuted.
Trina? All right,
And
so
Renata.
Kyle, then
And Renata.
all right, so Kyle, Trina, then Renata.
All right, so I'll just make it
Kyle,
short. Sorry. Hi guys.
Trina, and then Renata. Okay, go right ahead, Kyle.
Hi guys, good evening. Sorry for the lateness. I just wanna very short, just wanna piggyback on what both Maria and Beresford had mentioned. They had mentioned 2 key things that sit with me when it comes to this scenario, which is 1, Maria had mentioned the willpower, which is very, very, I believe is very important as it relates to, especially for the young people where we are now. We need to be more, depending on how active we are in governance and government and everything, that will tell how our 2025 will look. We have a lot of active young people who are very vocal and stuff like that, but if we don't put ourselves in certain positions to make those things happen, then 2025 will just be the same how it is now. And also, in terms of what Beresford had mentioned, as it relates to how the local man on the ground can get involved, it's always the upper, the person who is on top is always involved in government, but our local man on the ground always left behind. 2025
Okay.
years from now, you know, everything will evolve, technology, everything. And if we don't keep up to the time and run with certain things, then, you know, we'll be left behind. So for me, it's like what Maria and Beresford mentioned, the willpower, especially in terms of how young people put their place themselves now, and how we can get the local man on the ground involved in terms of governance.
Okay, so willpower, local person on the ground, and we are hearing also about signs of aspirational government and seeing the parts beginning to take shape and interlink with one another towards some big picture. Trina, next is
Hi.
Trina.
Good evening, Miss Carlin. Good evening, everybody else here. I hope everybody could hear me properly.
Yes, we can.
Great, wonderful. What I wanted to say from earlier, I probably should have just cut in instead of raising my hand, but I hope that we didn't pass that topic a little bit too far now.
No, go right ahead, go right ahead.
Okay, great. But
because
what I wanted to say,
everything links.
Yes, exactly. So I know that a major thing that we were talking about earlier is what our primary focus or what was being spoken about is governance. But I want to link that back to education being something that I think is extremely important right now in the society that we're currently living in. We have seen, especially because of COVID-19, and COVID-19 in no term, in my humble opinion, damaged our educational system. I believe COVID-19 just showed us the cracks, the crannies, all of the flaws that existed in our educational system. So for me, apart from governance, when we look at the function of civil society and even young people, when we're talking about the development of our country, we need to think about the educational aspect, right? As we have rightly mentioned previously, a lot of people, I don't want to call all of the names right now, but we were talking about the comparisons and the differences between various Caribbean countries and Belize as it relates to governance and as it relates to different systems that they have in place for governance. But if we simply look at even education as a driver for a lot of these Caribbean countries, what is something that they do for their people with the limited resources that they even have? A lot of them push education in various aspects. Trinidad, for example, which is where Maria and I studied, Trinidad, they have a system of education where they push up until a bachelor's level education, quote unquote, free education for their people. I'm not saying we could afford something like that, but I am saying that as a country, as a government, as people in Belize, we often negate the educational sector. Education, we all know, is a driver for success. We know it's supposed to be something that allows people to get better jobs. We know it's something that allows people to come out of poverty. We know it's something that just allows the common layman and their family able to understand simple aspects within the society and its governance. So for me, something like education is extremely important to push in Belize. And civil society plays a great role in that. Because when we look at civil society, we see what they do for different marginalized populations. We see it within poverty alleviation and things like that. But civil society also has a role to play as it relates to education and the education of marginalized groups. I would also want to say, when it relates to us youths, we know what we're going through, right? But again, as a topic, and I don't want to, again, beat a dead horse, but a critique that we have gotten, or not just a critique actually, but also a comment, I would like to say, when we have been working with the Youth Voices Matter and we've been trying to encourage the youth voices and their decision making as it relates to governance, is that there are a certain amount of youths or a certain population of youths that are seen as more privileged, or youths that are able to make certain decisions better, youths that are able to actually have their voices be heard, right? And as it relates to youths, and civil society, I definitely think we need to talk out about education much more and try to see how we can push government to increase and to encourage different forms of education within the country and to actually target marginalized populations. My mother is an educator. She's a teacher, and she's been a teacher for 25 years from before I was even born. And I have seen how education itself has taken my family out of different kind of impoverished situations many times. So when I look at my neighbors and the average man on the street, we might not be able to do it in 2045 for the current average man. But as it relates to children and youths that are coming up, definitely I see something could happen if we put the importance and the onus on education.
Excellent. So education and governance seem to be the trend coming out of this group, and the linking governance to planning and so on. So good, that's great. So now we have Renata.
Hi, good night, everyone. So I don't want to do not want to go off of what and repeat what Trina was saying, basically, but that was one of my points about education. However, I would like to make mention that I actually had a conversation with a colleague of mine that is studying, and this question was actually brought up about where you see Belize in the next 20 to 30 years, or where you see yourself in Belize. And I found that speaking to young people, not just my colleague, but a lot of young people don't have hope in the country because we keep going backwards or doing the same thing over, and it's very stagnant. There's a lot of talk. Yes, we have advocacy, but we don't have a lot of action to back up the advocacy. I mean, people talk on Facebook, you get upset, and then that's the hype for the 2 days, 3 days, the most, and then something dies down. So there's a lot of build up for movements, and then after that, it just dies down when things aren't going the way you want it to go. So when it comes to the betterment of our country and us actually moving forward, I wouldn't want to say we'd be worse off, but I wouldn't say that we'd be better off, if that makes sense. Because I can see that we're having more conversations, like, for example, mental health. We're looking into these topics a little bit more, but however, we're just talking about it. And a lot of times we talk, we maybe make a policy that's really pretty and nice, but like, I think it was Maria that mentioned, or I'm not too sure, that we don't enforce anything properly. We have these pretty documents sitting down on a table, and that's it. After that, no one really enforces it. No one even actually is knowledgeable of these policies, so people don't know what they're governed by. And so it goes back to education too, that people aren't educated, so they don't know how to make informed decisions. They don't know how to really fight. They don't even know, they don't have a voice because they don't have the information to actually properly have a voice. So I feel like I'm going on about different topics, but it's linking to the idea of that.
It's linked, it's linked because you're also linking back to some points that Beresford raised in terms of the whole issue of open governance and having people know more about what the government is doing. Because how many people can speak to knowing what a policy is? You may find that times they, and this may be, this is subjective, so let me say this. You have, and because I have participated in many quote unquote consultation, what you tend to find is that you will find those key groupings that may be interested in a particular policy when revealed. So they may attend the consultation, or there may be a workshop to or consult or stakeholder. But the reality, going back to the point that you are raising and previously raised, is that all this information don't necessarily go down and trickle down to the, I would say at the bottom level. It's not there, and perhaps that is an area where I think it was previously mentioned, and I think you have mentioned it also, that civil society may have a role in terms of bridging that sort of gap. To use Dominique word, Dominique used a word, it's a gap filler, right? But it may very well be that could be one such role, because it is these organizations, to a large extent, Red Cross, you know, all of these, you're seeing them on the ground working in the communities where the arms of a government service is not necessarily there. So that in itself could be some, you know, an issue as well. Those are great points, Renata. Anybody wants to add anything else?
Yes,
At
please.
this? Pardon me?
Yes, please.
Yes,
Just
please.
Go right ahead. Go. Who am I? Who is it?
Dominique.
All right, Dominique. Yes,
Yes,
go ahead,
just
Dominique.
very quickly. And to just add to the gap filler term, when I think Renata spoke about and you spoke about the trickle down, one of the things I think civil society can do is be the sort of conduit for the flow up of information from people. Barry spoke a bit about getting the common man, the lay person involved. The civil society as a whole can play a role in making sure the information from regular people is articulated and then sent up. I think that it can be another role. Instead of the trickle down, maybe we can get information from the ground up, no?
Excellent. So it's a two-way communications flow.
Yes.
You know, that basically that's what you're saying. Now taking it another step, moving. So we've discussed a lot about your optimism or cautiousness, I will use that word, in terms of what can happen by 2045. So if you were advising the United Nations, you've highlighted some key issues that you're saying that would need to happen in order for us to have this future by 2045. What would be, if you can maybe capture in 2 or 3 words, you can put it in the chat or you can speak to it. What is the key action you would want to see the United Nations take on in 2045? What would be that key action? Would it be any different from what you're speaking of now? Or do you think it is simply a continuation of what you're speaking of now? And you've highlighted quite a number of issues, from governance to education, to planning, to the role of civil society, all of this technology, use the technology. You've highlighted quite a number of areas. Do you see any specific action you would say by 2045, based on what we are expecting, this is an action that you should be taking? What's the future action you want to see?
Christine here, if you don't mind.
Yes, go right ahead, Christine.
Yes, good night, everybody. So I think one of the things that I would like to see is that we're in need of a new strand of like a diversity strategy, you know. Talking about the average, and I go back to Trina, she said this so beautifully, talking about the average man and youths that are coming up. Something that I would want to see, you know, in the future Belize is that we must be very careful of unconscious bias. And I would suggest that civil servants be firmly measured in Belize. You know, how many are women, how much come from ethnic minority background, you know, those who are disabled, and again, who are the ones that are actually coming from the lower socio-economic background. So that's something that I think I would like to see. And then we can say, you know, that we can say right now that civil servants might be diverse, but the truth of the matter is, but are they actually making their way to the top? Are they having a say in how policy is made and delivered? Do they feel included? Do they feel safe to challenge the status quo and so forth? So I think that's just what I have to say for now.
Very, so you're looking for a more inclusive.
Correct.
Yeah, more inclusive. Okay. Okay. Let me read a bit what's coming out of the chat. So Maria had said, to piggyback off Renata, even with having more conversations about mental health, what point does this practically serve if individuals are not able to afford to seek help via psychology to purchase medicine? Then Aiden says, for things to change by 2045, we need to engage more women and youths in the decision making. Tuition-free online university for youths from developing countries. Adding to Maria, how many people in our country are certified to diagnose someone suffering from mental health. At Aden, don't forget our men. UN to support open governance and e-governance programs in Belize. Inclusion of country vulnerabilities within policy considerations. Simplified access to funding, emphasis on actual M&E instead of ticking off the line items. These are some great ideas as to what actions we need to have by 2045. Now, this is a UN75 dialogue, and as you have seen, many of the issues that are confronting us are issues that are confronting many other countries in the global space. And we go back to some of the mega trends that we spoke about, the demographic shifts, the impacts of climate change, the whole issue of inclusion, of vulnerability in policy. Those things are very important because when you're talking about climate change, for example, the impact is disproportionate to vulnerable populations. It's disproportionate to women because oftentimes women have, they call it the double burden of life. It's disproportionate to communities and groupings that are already marginalized and that are already vulnerable. So when we then start looking at all these issues that are confronting us, climate change, as we said, violence, education, the fact that we don't have an inclusive system of governance, the fact that we are living in a day-to-day world without planning, and so on and so forth. Do you think that the United Nations plays a vital role in addressing some of these challenges? So I'd want for you to think of that and respond to that. Do you think the United Nations plays a vital role in addressing some of these problems? Again, we know that the United Nations is an organization that collaborates with governments. So do you think that the United Nations have a vital role in dealing with these challenges? And while you think about it, you can unmute your mic and I will be calling on you. And if I looked at what Maria said also as a recommendation, restructuring of priority lists for government, scholarships currently do not reflect the reality in 2020. This cannot be the case in 2045. Interesting. And Brian said, Belize must develop its national identity, which must be inclusive of knowledge systems across the nation. The ontological security of our people will not happen if they are not included in the national development framework. By included, I mean that there has to be better consultative mechanisms that will create community buy-in and not just compliance to development strategies. So those are some excellent recommendations. And so now we go to the point of, do you see that the United Nations is vital in terms of dealing with some of the challenges now and for the future? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I
go
had
right
unmuted.
ahead, Maria. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. I don't know if I would use the word vital. I think perhaps the United Nations may play a persuasive role, because at the end of the day, the United Nations cannot really compel a country to do a thing. Of course, because of the position Belize is in, we don't have that great a level of autonomy or significance, for want of a better term, on a platform. We're not a world power. We're nowhere near there. So it is easy to manipulate Belize. And so I guess, practically speaking, one could say that yes, they definitely do play a big role, because if we're asked to do something and we don't do it, then we know that there may be sanctions, and we are in a far, I guess, worse position than a lot of other countries, in that we would be severely affected by that. So yeah, I definitely do think it plays a role. I'm not sure if I really answered the question, but
Yes, you did, you did, you did, you did. And I think the whole issue of the UN playing a role is also to be mindful that when as we spoke about many of the issues that are confronting us, and let us for argument's sake use climate change, COVID-19. None of these issues are only unique to Belize. There are issues that are affecting the entire world. And so the impacts of climate change, while it may be felt locally, in terms of, let us look at the recent flooding that took place and the impact it had on many communities where millions of dollars have been lost. It is also linked back to those governance systems that we keep talking about, because when you see the state of the infrastructure, how it has been damaged by the flooding. Now, this is infrastructure that we're still paying back money for. So you find these infrastructure being damaged. So you're finding that lots of the challenges, the climate change issues, COVID-19 again is not just about a Belize issue. It's an issue that is affecting the world. Gender inequality, the role of women, and inclusive governance. These are not just affecting Belize, they're affecting the world. And so when you spoke about the role of the United Nations, and you're seeing it, as you said, they have a persuasive role, but they have a role because you see the role as being persuasive in terms of getting the government, perhaps through the signing on of the conventions of human rights and sustainable development, on the elimination against violence against women, and so on and so forth. There's so many conventions that we have signed, and so their role then in terms of that collaborating responses, that has to be considered in terms of whether their role then is vital or not in terms of addressing these issues. So you're quite, I like the word persuasive. And that also leads me to another area which I had wanted. So you have started, and I would like to ask everybody else then, and remember you can put things in the chat as well, to also in defining whether the United Nations is vital, the role is vital in terms of addressing the challenges, whether this cooperation that the United Nations does, the global cooperation in terms of addressing these issues, if it's vital. How would you define, how would you describe the United Nations in doing this? And I loved what Maria started. She started me with this because she said she defined as persuasive, right? So we will write that down, as a word for which the UN is defined. So can you go ahead, anyone else?
Beres, I think you may done unmute
right.
your mic too.
So we have Beres, then Bryant, right? Yeah. And I see, so Beres, then Bryant. Okay, go ahead, Beres.
Really good points there from Maria. One of the things I would like to add is I think there's a major opportunity for the UN to be that forum or that environment where the change can happen. Just thinking about climate change that you had mentioned there, Ms. Carlin, the flooding problem, and this is my personal thoughts about that, wasn't only an issue caused by climate change, but by development planning as well. And those who are like yourself, who are trained in planning and development planning, may have some inclination as to what I'm referring to there. But what I think the UN really can offer tangibly to countries is that forum or that platform where small countries or small country groupings can continue to shape multilateral strategies and multilateral plans of actions around the world. Because just like with the climate change situation, it's not only a problem for Belize by itself, and it's not only a problem that Belize can change by itself. So it gives us a forum where we can, join up with the ACP and other small island developing states and developing economies to bring together positions that would be relevant for the wider groups, and not have to sit back and wait for the G20 to make decisions as to how the world is run. You know, so that's to me one of the big benefits of it. Of course, what is missing from quite a lot of the UN led actions or changes, thinking about the Paris Agreement, for example. There's a lack of it's a lot of best endeavor language in terms of what countries need to do to get to those targets. If the UN is to evolve, I think there must be some more meaningful ways to enforce some of these goals and targets to ensure that bigger countries comply. Right, so that's one. But from the perspective of small island developing states and small and vulnerable economies, and this is me now thinking more from the trade aspect of how we classify countries. These one size fits all type of metrics, like classifying countries based from their GDP per capita and that type of thing. The UN is an ideal forum where we can get to get deeper into breaking down how we classify countries. And a lot of researchers have tossed out the whole concept of vulnerability as the measure that should be used. And vulnerability has several different constructs, such as environmental, social, and economic. And that, of course, your classification in that then impacts your access to development funding, it impacts your access to meaningful technical assistance. So having a more nuanced approach as to how we go about classifying small countries like Belize, who may be above the traditional list of least developed countries like the Haitis of the world, would help, because we're one hurricane away from disaster. We're one, well, as you see with the pandemic, we're a health crisis away from completely bottoming out. So having a more nuanced approach and strengthening some of the enforcement mechanisms for the great aspirational targets that we have, whether it's through providing more incentives with development funding or something of that sort, will allow the UN to have more meaning in our development process.
Okay, great. All right, Bryant, you were next.
Yes, Miss Caroline, I want to quickly share just my experience having been a consultant with the United Nations Development Program. And I think from my perspective, working with the Biodiversity Finance Initiative, one of the things that I could definitely say would be greatly received by countries across the world is if the UN could somewhat find a way to provide support in terms of human resources to assist countries to develop the programs to suit their socio-political environment. I think a lot of times we take on these different programs and projects, and it doesn't fit or suit our environment. And I could speak that it was very challenging being able to prepare reports and to go about getting or collecting information to address some of the issues that we face here in Belize, because the program just didn't fit our socio-political environment. And so if we could move away from having countries adapt these blueprints that doesn't necessarily work for these countries or some of these countries, and actually move to something that's more targeted or specific, I think that would be a plus with relations going forward with the United Nations.
Excellent. Move away from their blueprint and make our own blueprint. Love that. Okay, let me see if there is anything else. Let me get some word here. All right, soft power is a word that which UN is defined. I think the UN is a sort of conglomerate of world power that doesn't necessarily play the role of being a catalyst for equitably distributing that power. We see it with the US ability to simply pull out of the Paris Agreement with a shrug, and then manifested in the unequal distribution of the consequences of climate change. I think therein lies the opportunity to strengthen the bridge, or rather the ebb and flow of those power plays. Agreed, Barris, indeed, there cannot be one size fits all approach if there is not a single size, and then definitely B. So we kind of then come to the end of this great conversation. You know, I intended for it to be an hour or so, and we have passed that hour. Is there anything else that you would like to add, anyone? We can take it one at a time. Just unmute the mic. If you have any last word that you think perhaps was not fully captured, but which you would want to reiterate and amplify in terms of any immediate action, any future action, a word you would define the UN, or any advice to the UN in terms of how it can better deal with some of these issues. You've listed quite a mouthful, and we have documented it and recorded it all. So anybody wish to do a final word? Okay, Lucien, go right ahead. I see Lucien. Then was it Brighton? Your mic was out as well, and Beresford. So I see Lucien, then Brighton, then Beresford. Okay, go ahead, Lucien.
All right. I must go back to the genesis of our conversation and highlight that in order for civil society to be more involved, number one, there must be a reform happening in the public sector so that the civil society can have a seamless interaction with the governance system. As well as it relates to the UN, reiterating what Beresford had said and what was previously mentioned, that there cannot be a one-size-fits-all, and that we as Belize must make strategic partnerships to not, I won't want to use the word demand, but to advocate for more using the platform that the UN provides so that we can have more technical assistance coming into Belize, and then at the same time, civil society interacting with these mechanisms that are coming in, and that people can hold the government accountable to these technical advice that we get coming in. We every year we get a lot of technical people coming into Belize, but sometimes they're trumped over by whatever and the powers that may be. So there must be a mechanism in place so that these technical advice come in and they're actually used. And this is, for me, for the UN to work, it must be a more localized approach for it to work. We must take the advice that must be given. I mean, we have gender specialists, environmental specialists. I mean, so a part of the UN, what's the one that deal with children and youth? They work right above, UNICEF work right above me. And every day I see people coming in from all these exotic nations, and we do not harness, or we do not hone in on what they're telling us, and we do not implement what they're telling us to do, or we do not take what we can take and then make our own blueprint, as what Brighton alluded to, that we need to make our own blueprint. So the UN plays that collaborative role, and we need to capitalize on it more. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, great. So you need to capitalize on the collaboration that they can provide and the platforms to support the technical advice and make use of it. Okay, Brighton. Yes, Brighton.
I think Lucien said a mouthful just now. I just want to end off with saying that the young people are energized. We are looking forward to working and collaborating with the UN. We have great stuff in development happening at this present moment. And so just extending our hand in partnership as young people in our country is what I would like to end off with.
Okay, great. Beresford?
Yeah, I think Brighton took my idea there just now. It's not my idea.
Are you brothers? Are you brothers?
Last time I checked, we are. Yes. For me, the one thing I always try to think about is what I can do to make the process of partnership more meaningful with the UN, with all the UN agencies, and what they do in Belize and how it impacts people in my age group, of course, because we are the now, but we are also the future. 25 years from now, I'll be close to retirement age if I stick to the public service, public service timing. But what I will continue to signal to all of my colleagues is that we must become more organized. The UN, I'm certain, can help us in that regard in terms of pulling together all the youth expertise that's around this country and having them join in as a contributing member and as a force to be reckoned with in the civil society ranks. Because for far too long, of course, youth has been a buzzword almost. It's been used in projects to ensure that you secure funding, but it's never been really at the forefront or at the core of what these projects try to accomplish. You know, we throw in youth and gender to ensure that we get more money for whatever we want to do. When the real beneficiary of these projects and programs should be the youth or the women themselves. So for me, it's to see how we fit in this big picture and to figure out how we can make youth move from a concept to an actual tangible body in Belize's social and political economy. That is the call I signal to all of my colleagues, and that is something that I will continue to challenge myself over the next 5 to 10 years. And as I move into my ranks as an elder statesman, I'll continue to encourage my colleagues to do so as well.
I heard that. Let me hear what Christina has to say. That's awesome, Beresford. And I hope you all continue the great work that you all have been doing and stick together and lead and steer the ship. Christina says, yes, I believe the UN plays a diplomatic role through their vast networks that they can provide for a small country like Belize. When countries lay out their challenges and problems, countries can then put their heads together to come up with actions that can make a difference. Of course, through new and individualized strategies. Therefore, you not only start to pave the way for your country, but you are improving and setting the stage for people who are going to join after you. Lucien says again, thank you all for inviting to be a part of this. I do believe that once we have more conversation like this, develop these strategies, and with the proper M&E, I can see a better Belize in 2045. That sounds good. So if there is no, I don't see any other mic that has been unmuted. Kyle, do you want to say something? I see your mic unmuted.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I was just wanting to add in on what Mr. Dawson had mentioned. He actually mentioned some stuff that I wanted to say in the first place.
Okay.
As it relates to what we can learn from the UN as it relates to data.
Okay.
When it comes to the UN, they have a lot of global data and the possibility of when they come into country, the finance to do local data. And we realize that a lot of our government departments are not data driven. So we do all these programs and all these projects, but it has no baseline data to it. It's not, there's no M&E structure attached to it or nothing. The only time you'll see a department or some organization that do some kind of program that are data driven or have some M&E, if it's linked to or if they got money from the UN. So without that, we always, most department, we always do projects based on, we sit and say, oh, we think that this might be good for this community, let's do it. Rather than looking at the data and then creating your project and your program based on the data. So like what Mr. Dawson mentioned, we need to be more data driven and learn some stuff from the UN as it relates to that.
Great. So that's a great way to leave and to end. I also want to ask you, as each of you, to go online as whenever you can, as soon as you can. There is a UN survey. You just have to Google UN75 online, and it takes you to a UN survey where you can also add your voice to the conversation. It only takes a minute for you to do. So it is UN75.online. It asks some of the questions we discussed, as well as it asks some more. We thank each and every one of you for taking the time out on a Saturday evening for young people. That was kind of, great to know that you took a Saturday evening to have this great conversation. And we will be sure to keep in touch. Keisha has put in the link for the survey. So we just, like I said, ask everyone if you could please take the survey. Your voice has been heard. It will be counted, and we will ensure that the report that goes in summarizes and captures everything that you all have said in terms of priority issues immediately and the future, and also ways in which the UN can address and work in partnership with groups like yourself to address some of the challenges and problems that we have. Once again, thank you. Stay safe. Make sure you wear your mask, keep your 6 feet social distance, and don't go out if you do not have to. Just my thoughts to you. Thanks a lot. Appreciate, and I will keep in touch.
Thank you, Scarlett. You be safe, and everybody take care of yourselves, like you said.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you too. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.